Am I on with the lavalier? All right. How's everybody doing today? Thanks for coming out. My name's Jay Lewis. I work at EverBank. I'm a data analyst. I work within the marketing department at EverBank. Specifically, my team is responsible for EverBank.com, About EverBank, our corporate site, a lot of the mobile apps. Essentially, most of the ways that you would interact with us via glowing rectangle. That's kind of our area. I've been using Tableau for not quite 4 years, so this is actually my third conference, but first one here as a speaker, so it's always exciting to be here with thousands of people from all these different industries who are excited about what's a pretty nerdy thing that we do, but you know. Thanks for coming out to listen to a topic that's near and dear to me, which is figuring out all the crazy, messy patterns of how people navigate through websites. So this presentation, I kind of broke it into two parts. The first part wanted to do kind of a high-level view of how we use data visualization in Tableau within my role and kind of within our little corner of the organization. I use Tableau really, I think, in kind of three distinct ways. It's really a speed tool for data visualization, right? I mean, that's really its core strength, is how quickly you can spin up these charts and graphs. So I use it as kind of almost an ad hoc sketchpad. You know, in my day-to-day work, all the time there will be just kind of questions popping up sometimes about a topic that maybe there's not necessarily a production report out there on Tableau server, but I find Tableau to be incredibly fast to just be able to run a quick query, copy-paste a graph, it goes in an email, and we go on our way. We also do explanatory reporting, you know, and I distinguish that from things that are out there on Tableau server for people to click around. You know, each month I do have report outs on certain general topics where, you know, it's on me as the analyst to not just provide the charts and graphs, but to help provide interpretation and recommendations. So sometimes that's not just giving people the interactivity of Tableau, but actually I'm going in and, you know, generating these findings, putting it into cleaner kind of PDF reports, those sorts of scenarios. And then, of course, you know, the part that we all know and love, those interactive ones that we can, when we have a topic that people need to get to quickly, we do use Tableau server, so we can put reports up there. I would say especially for kind of my business line users who rely on, you know, certain pages and are really concerned about certain conversion rates. I like being able to put those out there on server so that they can go and answer their own questions. So that'll be kind of the first half, just kind of the high level where it all fits. And then we're going to go into a couple of specific business cases. For me, I really view data, think of it this way, the Oscar I'm going for is Best Supporting Actor. You know, we're not necessarily in the data business at EverBank, but data is very core and important to what we do. I mean, we're trying to provide the best banking and lending services to our clients that we can. And data is there to serve and help us in that effort. So that second half, though, I'm just going to show you a couple of business problems that we solved using data, and that really helped us to prove out the value of the tool. And I will try to leave about 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So I do see a couple of familiar faces in here from our North Florida Tableau user group, but for anyone that's not familiar with EverBank, we are a nationwide provider of banking and lending services. We do have some brick and mortar financial centers. Those are mostly in Florida, but the majority of our business is in direct banking, which is common now. You know, we've kind of seen the shift from banking as a place you go, you know, to the branch to more a set of services you use, you know, with apps, online bill pay, online banking, all those fun things. You may also know us for EverBank Field. We're that stadium that put 2 swimming pools in the club level, so you'll see ESPN cut to that from time to time. We have a really cool jumbotron too. All right, you know, I think of data visualization as kind of living at this intersection between statistics and design. I think there's a really kind of useful metaphor for understanding it. You know, we're taking on the one side, it's something where you really get to engage both sides of your brain, right? You've got these, you got to figure out all this logic and, you know, left brain kind of stuff, but then you're figuring out interesting ways to present it, and there is a creative design aspect to this. But I don't want you to just think of this as a metaphor. This is actually literally true in my case. I used to work in St. Louis when I started with EverBank, and then I took this job in marketing about 2 years ago, and that moved me down to Jacksonville. And my first cube was literally between marketing analytics and creative. So I was right there in between. So, you know, we had the data scientists on one side and doing their advanced, you know, their SaaS models and all that kind of stuff, and then I had the creatives on the other side. But, you know, really, it's kind of a fun spot to be, and not just because I get to make creatives think about math all the time, because that is really enjoyable in its own right. So web analytics, you know, this is the data I work with on a day-to-day basis. This is how people navigate through the website. And before I start showing you some visualizations, I think it's useful to kind of do a level set of how we track this, because it has some similarity to the way a lot of major websites work. We use Google Analytics in tandem with a tool provided by IBM that used to be called Core Metrics. Google Analytics, and I do work some with the Tableau GA connector. It's good for kind of some quick finds, but it's not particularly granular. I don't know if anybody has ever had that experience working with GA. It is good for us, though. You know, we use it in conjunction with AdWords. There are some places where it is helpful. But the IBM tool is really kind of the meat and potatoes of my day-to-day. And so that works by setting a couple of cookies. And you know, setting cookies to do your tracking, this is pretty standard. I was reading a 538 article maybe about a year ago about the invention of cookies and how those came about. And the guy who came up with the idea in the 90s, he said that before cookies, it was like your browser didn't have a memory. So every time you would go back to a site, you had to keep reintroducing yourself, and it was a really frustrating experience. So they came up with this idea of being able to drop this little cookie so that now, you know, you go back to Amazon, you go back to different sites, it knows who you are. But from our perspective too, it gives us a way to, you know, track return visits, you know, all these sorts of fun web analytics metrics. So we set 2 cookies. There's one that's temporary, so that expires at the end of your browser session. There's another that's persistent. I'm from the South, so the way I explain that is, it's like your Winn-Dixie card. We just scan it every time you come through the store. If you guys don't have Winn-Dixie, substitute whatever has that equivalent card. And then as you move through the site, these tags fire. That generates data. Data has timestamps, and we can piece it together and build reports. The types of tags that might fire when a page loads, it fires a tag. When you click a certain conversion event, like that all-important, I don't know if everybody can see the green Open Now button on the far right. It's okay, you can go on your phones and click Open Now to open an account. That's totally fine. We track that with a conversion event. You know, signing on to online banking, that's a conversion event. We want to know who's, you know, clicking through from the home page to read these articles. So all sorts of different types of tags. Query string tags, we use those. So if you're clicking back from an email or from a promoted link, you know, everybody's seen the URL with a little question mark, all the stuff after the end. That's tracking stuff. So for us, we use that, and we can connect it again to these 2 cookies. And what I get is something that looks kind of like this. So each day this happens between 10 and 20,000 times. People come to the site, they click around, we get this timestamp level information. And then once a day at the end of the day, the IBM tool actually zips up all the sessions and puts it in a secure spot where we can have a process to grab the data and then populate it to a set of tables that live on our data warehouse. We've got about 16 tables that are relevant to this. It's kind of their standard sort of set, and it actually works pretty well. This is just what one session might look like. This is 4 of those 16 tables. Realistically, I probably use about 12 of them. There's a few that are kind of just throwaway data. The page view is the really meaty one. That's the one that gets a lot of data, and you can see that timestamp progression. You know, they went to the home page, they hit an exit page from online banking, they hit, you know, 2 more pages. Then we're also grabbing data on, you know, the basic tech properties. You know, we want to know things about the browser and devices that people are using, how those trend over time. That helps us prioritize when we need to make fixes. So, you know, if we get a feedback form of somebody complaining about performance of the site, and I can look back and see that they're on IE7, we're not too concerned about that. And then we've got, you know, our landing page that gives me some basic referral information. In this case, this was somebody who went to Bing and keyed a natural search term. For those of you that work in SEO, you know that it's increasingly more and more of a challenge to get these natural search terms. I can actually get more from Bing now than I can from Google. Ever since 2011, Google is just hiding more and more of them. And then, of course, geography. We get some basic information. It's kind of down to the city and metro area. It's no more granular than that. So what do we do with this data? We build charts. So you remember on the home page, there was a little sign-on button up the top right? And that's on, you know, our desktop version of the site. I guess you could hit it from a tablet. So that sign-on button, I have a little tag on it. So if somebody signs in, tag fires, we get this. So I just pointed Tableau at it and did kind of a distinct count of all the session IDs for every day over the course of a year. And you start to see some patterns here. I added some color to kind of, you know, bring these patterns out. So the first of the month, I gave it a red color, so you can see where those hit. And then the difference between a weekday and a weekend is a dark green and kind of a light yellow chartreuse there. So the first thing you notice here is because most of this is desktop traffic, tends to come during weekdays as opposed to weekends. So you see those yellow lines tend to be about half the size of the green lines overall, Saturday and Sunday, lower traffic. The other pattern you start to see is the red, especially with these middle months, April, May, June, July, big spike on the red. So that's the first day of the month. Now, if you think about this intuitively, this makes sense, right? A lot of people come and manage their money at the first of the month. They're seeing what came in, what came out. They've probably got bill pay set up for things which tend to be monthly, monthly budgeting. So it makes sense. We've got a spike in traffic first of the month. But if you go back to February and March, the red line's way down. It's because first of the month was a Sunday. So people were waiting until the following Monday. So the pattern is really the first weekday of the month, we know we're going to have a spike in traffic for online banking sign-in. If you get towards the far right side, we migrated over some of what was an old EverHome mortgage site, so that had a little bit of an uptick in traffic just from new people hitting the site. My favorite data point on this, though, is right around January 1st. It kind of breaks the pattern a little bit. You see our first of the month thing, but that's not the really big one. The really big one is this one, which is the first weekday after Christmas. So this is the how much damage did I do balance check. All right, so just stepping back a little bit from this example, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the purpose and function of data visualization. As I was learning this stuff, I think like a lot of folks here, I latched on to some of Stephen Few's work. And I think Stephen Few had a really good explanation for why we do these visualizations. And this really helps me and informs how I try to work and how I try to practice data visualization. So his model was that you visualize data because you want to explore, understand, and communicate. All three are equally important. Communication is my favorite, but all three are equally important. So exploration is a great quote by, I don't know if anybody knows, Clay Shirky. Wrote a really good book called Cognitive Surplus that was about the open source movement and about how and why that works and how we got things like Wikipedia and GitHub. But his quote was, there's no such thing as information overload. There's only filter failure. And to me, this makes a lot of sense because, I work with tables that are, pretty big and pretty messy. So having a tool like Tableau to be able to carve those 2 million site logins to give you that day-to-day view over the course of the year, you can very quickly explore that data. Understanding. Anybody here know Grace Hopper? Grace Hopper's a great name, especially I would say, anyone who's got like a niece or a daughter in here, if you need somebody who's kind of an inspirational figure for like STEM careers in science and technology, she's really cool. She was the forerunner of COBOL, got her PhD in mathematics in the early 30s. She was involved in the war effort and in the Manhattan Project. And when she was working up COBOL, she was actually working in the business sector, and she found that she was having trouble explaining all the math to all the men working in finance. So she came up with the idea that what if we made kind of a compiler sort of language that was a little bit more conversational, that used actual conversational stuff. And so that became COBOL. But for those of you who saw some of the vision presentation earlier this week and kind of Tableau's ideas about conversing with your data and being able to like write out questions, that's an old idea. This quote, though, a human must turn information into intelligence or knowledge. It's not Tableau's job to tell you if the answer makes sense. That's where the analyst steps in, right? But we are pretty good. We're kind of hardwired at understanding, these data points encoded into shapes can very quickly make sense. If I showed a bar chart with 20 items to a 12-year-old or an Excel spreadsheet with the same 20 data points to a PhD in math, the 12-year-old's probably going to be able to tell me the min and max faster than the PhD. Our brains are hardwired to understand data encoded as shapes. And communication, I love this quote. If we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. Jim Barksdale is a Oxford man, obviously Oxford, Mississippi, near where I grew up in Memphis. Went to Ole Miss. He was actually the CEO of Netscape back in the 90s. And what I love about this quote is when you first read it, it sounds kind of arrogant. And then when you think about it, it's actually not at all arrogant. Because what he's saying is that if I can make an informed decision rather than going with my gut, please help me make that informed decision. And that's really the power of data visualization, and what we do is we can help guide people to make those better informed decisions. One quick story before I get into more EverBank data about how communication can go wrong. Because I do feel strongly that communication of data is one of the easiest places for it to go wrong. Anybody ever been to North Dakota? I understand it's very cold. This is a map of North Dakota. Just flip through this together in Tableau. That's Grand Forks we have called out right there. The Red River sits on the border between North Dakota and Minnesota. There's actually 2 Red Rivers in the US. The other one's between Oklahoma and Texas, but this is the north one. And it's kind of a funky river because it runs south to north. So it actually passes Grand Forks and Fargo, well, Fargo and then Grand Forks, and then it passes Winnipeg and it empties into Lake Winnipeg. Now, I understand that North Dakota is very cold. I pulled this from the just National Weather Service data. This is the average temperature with the actual average per day per month there called out as a reference line. So looking at this, you can see how for about 4 or 5 months out of the year, it's pretty consistently below freezing. And I live in Florida, and I find this graph absolutely horrifying. So, but this does pose a problem because in the upper plains, it snows all winter. So, and while it snows and it stays below freezing, the snow just kind of piles up. I just had a buddy who interviewed in Winnipeg, and he said that there are actually people who put flags on their antennas to be able to see around the snowbanks. Again, this is all terrifying to me. But what happens is the snow builds up, and then spring comes, and there's a big thaw. It all melts, flows into the tributaries, flows into the Red River. Red River's flowing south to north. Well, which part's thawing faster? The south. So the river kind of slows down a little bit, so Grand Forks has a lot of flooding. Really bad problems in flooding every April. And they actually designed a series of levees to protect the city from flooding. The levees will protect up to 50 feet, which is considered kind of their 100-year flood level. The average, you can see, and this is from the US Geological Survey, is about 29 feet above flood stage each year this happens. Now, 1997 was a particularly bad winter. There was a lot of snow, and the residents of Grand Forks were very concerned about the coming flood. So everybody was watching with bated breath for the National Weather Service forecast of what the flood stage was going to be. The forecast came in 49 feet. Looking a little dangerous. So they, knowing that no forecast is going to be absolutely perfect, they supplemented the levees with sandbags to protect up to 52 feet. The problem was when the National Weather Service communicated out this forecast, they didn't tell them that the historical margin of error was actually plus or minus 11%. So you probably know what's coming. It came in at 54 feet. Pretty good forecast. I mean, got it right, but not much comfort to the people of Grand Forks who had some pretty severe flooding that year and quite a bit of damage. They did go back and supplement the levees, and I picked on the National Weather Service a little bit here. I actually think overall the National Weather Service does a fantastic job with data and data visualization and communication of data. This was one slip up where they went back and reviewed their policies and figured out, okay, where did we go wrong? What can we do differently on this? But I mentioned this story because I feel like this is something that comes up all the time in our day-to-day work where a lot of the time people are just looking for the simple finding. And there's this idea actually in Gestalt psychology called the law of pragnans, which is people will tend to simplify a finding down to its simplest components. And I think this happens a lot of the time as analysts where it's tempting, where we're kind of down in the weeds, we feel like we know the data really well, and we send out a graph assuming it's going to be understood in one way, and it ends up being understood in a way that's a lot simpler and can end up being wrong. National Weather Service also does graphs like these, which I think are really well put together. And you don't have to be a resident of Florida, to know what this graph is. This was actually Hurricane Matthew. Did a tremendous amount of damage in Haiti and brushed by us in Jacksonville. We got a little lucky. It was a little bit off course. But I think this is an example, though, of the National Weather Service where they do a really good job communicating uncertainty in a forecast. It's kind of scary to think that it wasn't that long ago in history where a hurricane could just kind of sneak up on you, and now we have these great long-range forecasts. It would have been 100 years ago, could you have been standing on the beach? It feels a little windy today, All right, so it brings up another point, though. So that was an example of where communicating data can go wrong kind of unintentionally. I feel like there are other cases where sometimes, especially in political season, people can use data to make a point or deceive a little bit. And that's where integrity and telling the truth is really critical. I was at the 2014 conference in Seattle and got a chance to see Alberto Queiro speak. And if you haven't seen him speak or read his books, he's a fantastic guy for data visualization, works down at the University of Miami. actually in their journalism department. So data journalism is kind of his big area. But the idea he had that really resonated with me was that don't think of something as being just true or false. Truth is a matter of degrees. It's a continuum. So you can have the same data presented 3 different ways and tell 3 different stories. And all of them can be true, but probably one of them is a little truer than the other 2. I'll show you an example of what I mean. The BLS unemployment data, easy to find, publicly available data. If we wanted to compare the difference between 2009 and 2012, what happened between there? Well, one thing we could do is just do the before and after. Well, what does this communicate? Changelessness. Whenever you have like a monthly figure like this and the data points in the middle are omitted, that kind of always rings some alarm bells that, okay, what are they hiding? Because actually, if you look at it in a little bit more context, well, it did a lot more than that. It shot up for the first little part of it, then kind of came down and plateaued, did some crazy jagged stuff, came down and plateaued again, and then worked its way back down to 7.8. So version A, version B, very different stories, same data, both true. Version B is probably a little truer than version A. Or we could add even more context and build this like the Fed does their graphs, and we could shade the regions that are US recessions, and now you have even more context, and you can understand, okay, there's a strong correlation with when the US is in recession, unemployment tends to go up, then it ticks down when we're out of recession. So again, at this point, same data, a little bit more historical data, but we've got more context and hopefully a better understanding of the truth. All right, so and data integrity is a really good spot for me to pivot over to data quality. Anybody here have perfect data? Flawless data quality? Ideally, obviously, it's what we all want. Data can be off in a couple of ways, and it depends on the context how it would be off. One way to think of it is accuracy versus precision. And here's a good visual example. Data on the left is more accurate. We're closer to the truth, but our measurements are a little further apart. The precision is on the right. So now we've got measurements that are very close together, but probably a little bit off from what the real truth is. Now, it depends on the context, which one of these is preferable. But I'm going to put this one up as a question, though. Put yourself in my shoes. I'm tasked with measuring traffic on a website. So I'm going to ask who thinks I should be on team accuracy or team precision. So who's on team accuracy? Team accuracy? All right, who's on team precision? Pretty even split, pretty even split. I'm on team precision, actually. So, and there's a reason for this. If I measure a conversion rate at 10.1%, if the real conversion rate is 10.4% due to a combination of things like me not accurately filtering out bot traffic, me not catching some of that internal traffic of people on their phones off the corporate network where I sweep all the IPs, I don't necessarily care if the real truth is like 0.3 off for that. What's important to me is to know that if we make a change and then we measure a 2 percentage point lift using the exact same method of measurement, then we know we did something right and we know we made an improvement. Does that make sense? All right. Tableau time. Site search. So site search is one of my favorite data sets in web analytics to work with. And a couple of reasons for this. It helps us in a few ways. One is that, as we talked about a little bit earlier, Google isn't providing as many terms as they used to. So, but I collect all the data when people key in site search stuff, so I have all that data. So that's a supplemental source that helps me understand the language that people are using when they search for products. We like to assess our digital content relative to the voice of the client. So a good example is mortgage versus loan. We want to know that the term that people are using to think of the product has reasonable alignment with how we position the product. Clickstream data alone doesn't tell us much about visitor intent. I'll get questions sometimes about visitor engagement and how are we doing in visitor engagement. Well, visitor engagement is kind of a double-edged sword because I can tell the level of engagement, but I can't always tell the quality of the engagement. I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody comes to the site and visits 10 different pages over a 10-minute period, fairly common pattern. Now, I can look at that clickstream data, but I don't know if it's because they were super interested in everything and just couldn't decide which one of our awesome products they wanted, or maybe they were annoyed because they couldn't find exactly what they were looking for. So the clickstream data alone isn't going to give me that. With site search, though, this is people coming to the site, land, they go to that field up at the top, and they tell me exactly what they're looking for. It's useful. All right, so the data we have looks a little like this. Again, we have our session ID, a timestamp when they search. We've got a page URL, and you notice the little query string stuff at the end, so that's how we're able to capture the string that they key. So, and then we've got the query term, and then we did a little bit of extra SQL on the back end to do, lead lags calculations in SQL. So if we do a lead calculation, we can look at the next page they viewed, because that's helpful for us, because then we can understand the navigation paths. And I've got this in the deck, but I'm just going to go ahead and jump over to Tableau. Whoops. Drop this out of presentation mode. Yeah, here we go. All right, so site search. So this is all that same data that people have been keying in. And then here's what the dashboard looks like. And this is very much an exploratory view. You know, this sits on Tableau server. It auto-refreshes itself each day. And this is something that our designers, and especially our writers, can go to. And they can check and see, you know, what are the trends, what's kind of the popular language people are using. I used a word cloud in this. It's not the most efficient chart type, because it's hard to understand kind of rankings between them. But it's kind of fun to get sort of this holistic view of what all these terms are. And I like kind of to pair it with a bar chart, because then at least you can very quickly get that helpful ordinal ranking. And I'll give you a sense of how some of the interactivity works. So by category, we wrote some logic that'll kind of sort these into categories. So if you want to look at how do they search for banking products, you can click this. It'll highlight the word cloud, and it will filter the bar chart. You do the same thing with currencies and metals, or all this sort of fun Tableau interactivity. You know, click on a month and see what things look like there. By the way, I'm sure a lot of people knew this trick, but in case you didn't, this is not a color legend. This is an additional chart. The reason I used an additional chart is then you can do different actions off of it. With a color legend, it's not going to let you do those fun filter actions. So this is actually a chart where the columns is set to 0, but then I just hide the axis. But yeah, so by doing it that way, you can use it, for both a highlight action and a filter action. A couple other views we do with site search data. We do track the rankings by month. So this is a bump chart built on a parameter. You can see, mortgage, checking, money market, typically the top 3. The interesting one for us is actually CD and CD rates. CDs are very rate sensitive. So if we have a period like we did back in January where we had a very competitive CD rate, all of a sudden that brought in a lot of traffic because people find that rate via BankRate, via NerdWallet. So that'll jump up really high. And this is on a parameter, so we can add more terms in here, although it gets kind of crazy. We do a wildcard search. So if folks just want to see what matches different terms, it'll bring up everything that has a match. And with this, we find that, and this is true with a lot of stuff, there's usually kind of like one dominant version, and then there's a whole bunch of little long tail strings that they could hit. And then in terms of the paths they take, I just paired 2 bar charts together. So you can click each term, and then it shows the page that they routed to after they hit the term. Usually it's the first one in the results, but our results page also has some other terms on the right side. It's also got the whole top nav, so they don't necessarily always go to the first one. So that's site search. Again, that's kind of an exploratory view. The Meteor example, though, that I have, let me kick back to PowerPoint. And we'll just click through these since you've already seen them. Online account opening. So if you go to everbank.com, there's a little button on the right side that says Open Now. And if you click that button, you'll be routed into an application process for a new money market account, a new checking account, or you can get information on loans. We redid this actually a couple of times recently. We did one rewrite in 2012, and then we just launched a new rewrite back in May. So this most recent rewrite is going to be the focus of this set of views. This was something where we had a few business challenges to work through, and data really helped us each step of the way. It helped us first to highlight that we had a problem. It helped us raise awareness of the problem. It helped us make some design decisions to make the experience better. And now going forward, it helps us monitor and track KPIs around online account opening. So the challenges we faced, one was that the abandonment rate for the process was too high. We have an acquisition team in marketing that works with an agency, and we have ads, and people can click back to see products. Well, they found that when people clicked back, we weren't getting a very good conversion rate of people getting through that process. And that's a problem because a lot of that's paid traffic. We also found that the apps were taking too long to complete. So I did some research separately and was able to show that the median completion time from when they hit the first kind of panel of the app and got all the way to the end of accepting the disclosure, to the median time was getting close to about 20 minutes, which we thought was far too long. I think I don't hear the Geico standard as much anymore. The 15 minutes can save you 15% or more. I feel like with all the auto form filling now, there's definitely a push to get those sorts of experiences faster. So we definitely wanted to get that to under 10. The president of our banking division really wants to get 5, which we're trying. Inferior experience for mobile and tablet. So the last time we did a rewrite around when it was getting designed, around 2011, form filling, well, tablets had not really exploded like they are today, and form filling on mobile wasn't as big of a thing, partly because, the screens were smaller, and I think there was just a sense that people weren't that eager to fill out a long banking application, on a little phone. That's very much changed now. Now with auto form filling and the bigger screens, there is a pretty high demand to be able to do that experience on mobile. So we knew we had to address this. Resource intensive to maintain. With the old system, it took a little while to develop. It was kind of flashy. You got into the system. I'll show you a little piece of it, but you hit a panel that has information to key, and then it slides up and goes to another panel, and it slides up to get to another panel. It kind of looks like a game or something, but it was flashy, but it was a little bit of a behemoth to keep up. So we found that when we needed to make changes, it was much too resource intensive to get it done. Obviously, the most important one to me is the problematic page tagging. I had issues with the data coming back from that system. When it was designed, we didn't have the same architecture with our tags pushing data to get to our data warehouse running through Tableau. So it was a little bit of a different world where we were using more kind of off-the-shelf reporting that IBM was providing. So it didn't quite fit with the data being pulled in. Like one example is that, so we had these sliding panels, right? Well, they tagged them with page view tags. Well, the page view tags when something loads. So something loads, it's actually in the lower part of the screen in an inactive state, not in the top part that they're working on. So my timestamps were all a little off. So that made it really tough to work with the data. So I wanted to fix that. This was the old experience. So we used to have what we called a lead capture page or a jump page. So you click open now and you hit this page up at the top left, and it would ask what kind of account you're interested in, key in your name and email. You do that, then you go into the big sliding panel data entry thing, which looks like this. Usually if there's more than one panel, there's one kind of in the inactive state down there. So we ran some numbers on this. I'm going to put in some data here so this will make a little bit more sense. Now this is a Sankey diagram, and this is the one visualization I cheated on. I didn't use Tableau for this. You can build these in Tableau. You can definitely build these in Tableau. But this one, since it was for a static report that was kind of going to executives for the purpose, it was just a little quicker to throw it together in Illustrator. But what this is representing is fallout through the system. A Sankey diagram, it's an old chart type. There's a really old classic data visualization about Napoleon's march to Russia that you may have seen before. It's a good one to Google. And this works in a similar way. So volume is expressed as width. So think of these 4 black vertical lines as milestones in the process. That first milestone means they clicked the CTA. They clicked open now on a page somewhere. That second milestone means they got through this lead capture page. The third milestone means they got to what we would call about the halfway point of all these sliding panels. And then the fourth one is they accepted disclosures, which is the I submit the app is complete. Now, we found that from this lead capture page, of these 125,000 sessions, which is over a pretty long period of time, if they came in through the basic website, through everbank.com, 65% of those abandoned at this lead capture page. If they came in through a campaign path, which means that they did a paid search thing and hit a specific landing page, the abandonment rate was similar, about 63%. And for those of you that work a lot in web analytics, 65% bounce rate is not great. So we knew that was bad. Once you get past there, once they get into this sliding panel thing, about half bailed out before they even really got to the personal info section. And then from the personal info section to the end, again, we lost about a third through that process. So the whole thing end to end gave us a same session conversion rate of 10.9%. So this was our benchmark. This is what we were going to improve. And actually, I have something similar to this that was built in Tableau. It's not actually a Sankey because I wanted to give people a way to track it over time. I will show you that, though. Completion times. So I like using box and whisker plots for completion time data because I find the variance is really wide. Because no matter what you do, there's always going to be that one person that takes 3 hours to do the app. It's not normal, but no matter what we do, no matter how simple they make it, you're going to get that one session. So you can't really just cite an average of this. You're going to have big outliers. What I like about the box and whisker is it's a very clear representation of kind of what that typical range is, that 25th to 75th percentile. And I called out the median there. Now, I separated these into individual, joint, and business because the experience is a little bit different for each one. Joint's obviously going to have an extra applicant, so it's going to take a little longer. You know, especially if you think most joints are married couples, so it's like, do you know your spouse's social off the top of your head? You may have to check and pull that information. We expect them to take just a little bit longer. And then business also is a little bit longer. But you can see how individual over the course of this time was trending up. We had a median of about 15, and it was drifting. And it drifted up to close to 20 minutes. And that was really a function of the platform being difficult to maintain. So as we were trying to do maintenance and add products and things like that, it's code bloat. The thing starts to slow down a little bit. It's not loading as fast. Joint, same trend. It was about 20 minutes, a little bit higher. And business about the same. So, we showed this to our CMO and to the president of the banking division, said, we don't think this will work. We need to get this lower. And then we set some targets. Again, the president of our banking division said, can you get it to 5 minutes? I'm like, we're pretty sure we can get it under 10, and we're really going to try for 5. All right, mobile and tablet fallout. And this has some stuff at the top. This is actually copy-pasted from the PDF report we produced to make the case. This is actually just kind of a before and after comparison of all the sessions that were on the first panel and all the sessions that were on the last panel. And we found that when people hit that first panel, almost 20% were on the small handheld devices. By the time people got to the end, it was about 5% that were on the handheld devices. So in our mind, the fallout should be much more proportional by device. So this told us that there was definitely a problem. All right, so we had the buy-in. So we were able to pinpoint these problems. What do we do about it? And then this is the part where I can take this data and show it to web designers who are experts in user experience and work with them to figure out what's the better approach. So the first was, I think, kind of the obvious low-hanging fruit is that jump page has to go. If that's killing 2/3 of our traffic, that's absolutely not going to work. Number 2 is reduce the completion time by eliminating some unnecessary fields, simplifying disclosure acceptance. We had a really complicated process at the end of the app where you had to open up different PDFs. Because like I said, at the time, we thought that that was appropriate. It turns out from user testing, I know it's going to come as a huge shock, but most people don't read all the fine print. Sorry to... It's actually kind of eye-opening when I did a user testing session with the app, with the previous app we did, and people would come in and we get to observe kind of behind a one-way mirror thing, or a two-way mirror rather, and 2 or 3 people would hit the long section of disclosures and they would explicitly say, now I usually read all these all the way through, and I have the data on how long they spend on the disclosure step. So we wanted to make disclosures a little bit more like the iTunes service agreement, because that's really kind of what people expect. I mean, we are obviously a heavily regulated industry. We want to be as transparent as possible. We're required to be transparent. We want to make that stuff available. But the bottom line is, for a good user experience, what most people want to be able to do is click a couple of boxes and move on. Overhaul the tagging with Tableau dashboards in mind. So this was the part where I get to get the data and the shape and the structure that I want. And we actually switched to a process where we don't fire as many tags, but the tags we fire are a lot meatier. We pull in a lot more information. I mean, and it's little things like, there's a anonymous key for each application that obviously connects to, who the applications are. We capture that really early, and it fires on every tag. So I have a very easy way to blend data sets between web analytics and actually knowing more detail about the app, such as, all the products on it and all that fun stuff. Rewrite the front-end code for scalability. So we brought over a lot of this code from IT into marketing, and we have front-end JavaScript developers who now do a lot of the heavy lifting on this. Responsive design for better mobile and tablet experience. And focus on the highest volume paths to accelerate product delivery. So we have a lot of products, for example, in our world market space, which maybe aren't standard banking products. Like you can actually get a CD pegged to different foreign currencies, but it's a fairly complex set of products for what's comparably not a huge percentage of the volume going through the public application. So for things like this, we kind of looked at the data and did our little Pareto analysis. What's our 80-20? Where can we get the most bang for the buck and get this across the finish line in a shorter period of time? And then bring in the other stuff as fast follow projects. So we focused on kind of the 80% and got the individuals, the joints, and for the most common banking products for our money market, our CD, and our checking accounts. And here's the redesigned path. Here's what it looks like now. So, and again, I totally encourage you. We have great rates on money market and CD. Feel free to go to our site and experience this wonderful application for yourself. But now, instead of this jump page, you hit a product selection page. So it's kind of sales 101. It's get the product in their hand. So they go and they can select a product, and then we invite them to configure the product. That's the second step. Once they've configured the product, said how much they expect to deposit and what effect that would have on their rate, then they hit the big details page that has the data entry. And we have added little things to speed this up, like you key in your zip code and it pulls in the city-state automatically. Little things that accelerate the process. So we rolled this out on May 7th, and now we've got some data to show how we were doing. So I'll show you that. Now this Tableau viz is actually the equivalent of that Sankey diagram, but it's meant to measure over time. The Sankey diagram is more of a snapshot. This gives us more of a what's happening before after launch. I'm going to guess everybody can see when the launch happened. Just the drastic change in those lines, you can see, okay, something's different. What I did with this view is I've isolated it to only people that clicked open now either from a product page that was eligible for the new path or from one of those campaign pages that we were really focusing on, which again are eligible for the new path. The reason I isolated it to that subset is that if somebody clicks open now on the home page and abandons, I don't know exactly what they wanted. It could be just about, could be a lending product, could be world markets, I don't know. But with these, I can isolate this as, okay, this is the effect of the new system. The red line down at the bottom, I know we're using red for something good, but our logo's red. We like red. We'll break the rules a little bit on that one. The red line is conversion rate. You can see back here at the start of 2015, 10.4%. That same session conversion, that's comparable to that 10.9% I showed you earlier. Notice how it trends, maybe ticks up just a little bit. We have found that there are other things besides the user experience. Like if you have a really great CD rate, people will suffer through a bad application to get the rate. So it fluctuates with other things. But once the launch happens, that's when the big shift happens. And this green, yellow, gray line are those milestones of the Sankey diagram. Green means they got through the jump page, which in the old world meant they keyed name and email. In the new world, it means they added and configured a product. Yellow line means they got kind of about to the halfway point. Gray line's about maybe the 3/4 point. And then red is full convert. What I love about this change, for one thing is, obviously that 65% bounce rate is significantly better. A lot more people are willing to add and configure a product and look at the rates than they were to jump right into giving us their info so we can send reminder emails later. The other thing that's a little more subtle about this is that notice how in the before scenario, these four lines are pretty far apart. What that tells me is that it's not necessarily any one section of the app, but it's kind of the app as a whole. People were hitting this sliding panel, and they were getting frustrated somewhere along the way and abandoning. In the new system, what's happening is they add and configure a product. They get to that one page that at least that has the data entry. They either fill it out or they don't. What I love about that from a user experience perspective is that we haven't wasted their time. They're getting in there, they're seeing the page, either I have time for this or I don't. And if they abandon, we hope they still have a good experience and we'll come back and finish later. But the overall conversion, you can see it jumped up to closer to about 20%. So we almost doubled the conversion rate, so we were pretty happy about that. Mobile. This next one is what happened on mobile devices. A couple of trends here. I apologize, I had to black out the exact volumes for mobile traffic, but On the top, that's the number of people clicking through to start the app on mobile phone. You can see the trend over time is definitely up. People with these bigger phones are more eager to do these from their phones. The conversion rate, it's not quite as drastic as that last graph we looked at, but same session conversion was below 5%. Now it's about 10%, so again, roughly double. We were pretty happy about that. All right. And one more for you. And again, I'm just going to kick into Tableau so I can show you the interactivity. Completion times. Overall, about 8 minutes. Haven't quite gotten it to 5 yet, but not too bad. Another thing we really liked about this, see these box and whiskers are the number of seconds they spend on each page. Accept disclosures in the old app was about 3 minutes. Now it's about 53 seconds, the median. So that was a big savings. If you toggle to, oh yeah, I do have the toggle here, to just number of applicants, for one applicant, it's actually below 8 minutes. So even more progress there. So we're down to about 7 and change. Another thing we did for our ongoing record keeping is we built a replay tool. Now, in the old world, we actually had a separate tool that we contracted out and bought, and that would kind of record sessions in a way. So our analyst on the banking side who goes back and reviews this content, she would use that tool quite a bit. If she would get a negative survey comment or anything like that, she could go back and look at the session. So my advice on that was, why bother? We have Tableau and we have better data coming in, so let's just build a session replay tool in Tableau. So that's what we did. So these are applications. I did block out any identifying information about what they applied for, but you can see the session flow. And it's a Gantt diagram. And the way this worked is, so we have a tag that fires on each page load, right? We also added element tagging that fires on each section completion. Now, to build that into a Gantt view, on the page view tags, we did a look forward. OK, find the next page view tag. That's the amount of seconds they spent on the page. For section completion, we had to take that completion time and do a look back to when's either the last page view tag or the last section completion time. I hope that made some sense. But what you end up with is this Gantt view. It's a little bit like a waterfall chart. The green up at the top is the amount of time and seconds they spent on applicant details. Then this was a joint application, so they had another page like that. And then each page, you have the amount of time they spent down to the granularity of each individual section. And this is great for our banking analyst who focuses on the app, because every time she gets a survey comment that's critical of the performance or anything like that, she can actually go back in and really see the session and see what happened. And this is set up with all that usual fun Tableau interactivity. So you can go in and drill down to individual sessions. You can search by app ID, because the app ID will usually be on the top when she gets a survey comment back. So I know she's in this quite a bit.